Howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm David Cobb. I am the redneck. You bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to get you to do it too. And as a reminder, as we always do, when we say go green, we don't mean mere environmentalism. We're talking about a deeply interconnected reality. And whether you come at that from an eco-feminist spiritual perspective, or a hard science perspective, or like me, you recognize those are both completely valid ways to understand the world. The point is this: all of life is in a dance together. It is interconnected. Whatever humans do to that web, we ultimately do to ourselves. And y'all, let's just face it, we are doing it wrong. We are literally destroying Mother Earth and commodifying her faster than she can replenish herself. And if we do not rein in the predatory class and capitalism itself, we are going to destroy the planet that we so desperately need for survival. And on that cheery note, let's bring in our co-host and good friend, Shane Knight. Shane, how you doing, brother?
Where do you want to start, David? I'm mad as hell and hot as fuck.
Man, but I don't know where. Like we got the government kidnapping immigrants off the streets. We got political assassination. Oh, and wait, there's more. We're teetering on World War III.
Yeah, all in a week.
I mean,
how are you supposed to get any sleep with this going on? I don't either.
I don't even know what to
whiplash. Every day I wake up, it's just, oh no, I'm terrified to look at my phone and to have conversations with people about it at the same time on the streets and everywhere else around here. It's mind blowing. It's mind blowing. And to be fair, I'm pissed off. I feel like I'm being robbed of a life here because of this crap.
Man, I feel it as well. And I really feel like our guest today, Dr. Harriet Fraad, is going to be perfectly poised in time to answer that question. But before we bring in Harriet, I think that our friends over at the Democracy Collaborative put together another video for us this week. Am I correct?
I think she did. Let's see if I can bring that up.
All right, hit it.
Welcome to this week's Tracking the Crisis, a weekly news roundup of Trump administration actions and movement responses. As we probably all know by now, Trump made a unilateral move on Saturday to bomb 3 Iranian nuclear sites with bunker buster bombs. The bombing was conducted without consulting Congress on war powers authorities, nor any prior notification. This is a fast-moving story, and David and Shane will cover the latest. In the early hours of Saturday, June 14th, Minnesota Democratic State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband were shot dead at their home in what appeared to be a political assassination by Vince Bolter, a 57-year-old MAGA supporter and deeply religious evangelical conservative active in fringe Christian nationalist movements. Bolter also shot Democratic Representative John Hoffman and his wife at their home, who were critically injured but survived and are recovering from their injuries. A manifesto and hit list found in his car revealed that he had hoped to inflict fear through a killing spree of Democratic politicians, abortion providers, and other civic leaders. As right-wing political violence has surged, so has government repression against elected officials. On Tuesday, June 17th, New York City Comptroller and mayoral candidate Brad Lander was taken by masked agents and detained by ICE while accompanying a migrant at a federal immigration court in Manhattan. At least 5 elected officials have been arrested or detained by ICE while protesting or conducting oversight of the Trump administration's deportation sweeps, including Lander, California Senator Alex Padilla, and Newark Mayor Ras Baraka. On Saturday, June 14th, the No Kings Day of Action brought huge crowds onto the streets in over 2,100 locations across the United States and overseas. Data guru G. Elliott Morris estimates that between 4 to 6 million people attended the protests in total, involving approximately 1 to 2% of the total U.S. population. The turnout was bolstered by last week's uprising in Los Angeles against sweeping ICE raids, which galvanized the American public against the Trump administration's deployment of U.S. military troops on domestic soil. The protests certainly dwarfed, by orders of magnitude, the attendance at Trump's military parade, which was, well, I'll let it speak for itself. That's it for this week's Tracking the Crisis. Read more by signing up for our weekly news roundup in your email every Friday at trackingthecrisis.org. Back to you, David and Shane.
Well, thank you,
I'm
Mel
glad.
Figueroa and the Democracy Collaborative. I'm going to say that tagline, Shane. I love it. They read the news so we don't have to.
Yeah, I'm so glad that they do that. I love that Mel is having a good time working with us doing this and sharing her work with us too. And she made me laugh in the middle of all this crazy crap we're dealing with. It's important to do.
For those of you who are not watching the video, but instead listening to the podcast that Shane puts together at the end of this program, that squeaking you heard associated with a single solitary tank during Donald Trump's pathetic egomaniacal parade. You could literally hear the tracks of the tank squeaking on the ground. It was silent other than that sound. I got to tell you, for me, at least, Shane, I'll admit it's petty, I know, but I got a lot of satisfaction out of watching that.
Yeah, I did too. I don't think I can watch. I should probably start my days with that clip now. You know, I don't know, but there's just so much of the stuff that she brought up that's, I don't know.
Well,
maybe
look
we could
here.
get.
What I do want to let folks know, it is Monday, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. So here is the absolute latest. Since that Tracking the Crisis came in this morning, what we do know is that Iran launched a missile attack on U.S. military bases in Qatar. What we do know is that it was a tit-for-tat response. They sent the same number of missiles that were sent at them from the Tomahawks attack from Saturday. There was an advance warning given to the U.S., so it is possible that it does not escalate. But the problem is that Israel is escalating the crisis, and both Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates have closed their airspace. So, Shane, as a former Marine, this can only be called high alert.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely high alert. It's time to be on high alert. And I'm still blown away that that orange thing decided to do this, and that there was no oversight or are we just we've gotten to the point to where he can just say, hey, I want to blow something up, and that happens.
Well, look at here. I think that I'm not going to diagnose anybody, but this is clearly a narcissistic kind of behavior. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of our chat, I think our guest this week is uniquely poised to help us figure out exactly what is going on. So with that, I'm going to bring Dr. Harriet Fraad into the conversation. Dr. Fraad is an American feminist activist. She's a mental health professional who has been practicing in New York City for almost 40 years. She is a founding mother of second wave feminism in the United States. She's a founder of the journal Rethinking Marxism. She specializes in both writing and radio and speaking about the intersection between economics and psychology. And I'm going to say, I consider her a personal friend. It is my great pleasure to bring Dr. Harriet Fraad to Redneck Gone Green. Hey, Harriet.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, looky here. We were talking about this. Harriet, you and I really got to know each other whenever we were both guests on the David Feldman show. And I didn't really know your work at the time, to be honest, but I just found your insights so incredibly astute, profound, and on point. So it did not surprise me to learn that you were, in fact, an unapologetic Marxian or Marxist, that you were a mental health professional and a practicing mental health therapist. So with that, I wanted to just say you are, in fact, a true red diaper baby. So before we get into the substance of this conversation, I want to give you the opportunity to tell us a little bit about your personal story and history and how you came to be doing the work that you did.
Well, there are two tributaries to this river of work that I do. One is that as a little kid at 2 years old, my father went overseas, and because he was a communist, and decided that was the idea, that that's the place to fight. He was a doctor, so he became an army doctor instead of an American doctor who examined recruits going to World War II. My mother, who was never very enthusiastic about having the children she had a kind of nervous breakdown. And so I ended up living with various relatives, which was really helpful and contributed to my idea. One is I understood what it's like to be outside, to not have a place to belong, which is the way America makes a lot of people feel. The second thing is that when my father came back, he took me and my sister to what were called hootenannies. Those were performances of blacklisted artists. Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee played the harmonica, Paul Robeson sang, Paul Draper tap danced, and it was Pete Seeger sang. It was a very enthusiastic crowd that shared the values of worker control and collectivity. And those were really transformative, joyful moments for me because of the very connected enthusiasm. I didn't see, in the rest of my life, I didn't see adults like that, connecting and joyful. And that was a moving experience. And then, although my father only had cameo appearances in our lives, when he did show up, which was, at night over dinner or whatever, he would bring us books. And the books were by a left publisher, Marzani and Munsell, and they were biographies of people like Harriet Tubman and Haim Solomon, who was a Jewish guy who got involved in the American Revolution and who isn't celebrated because he's a Jewish guy, and other revolutionary heroes. And those were very, very important to me, those values. Also, having lived in different families with several different religions and different absolutes, I got to realize all these absolutes are crap, Make up your own decision in solidarity with your sister who was in the same boat, and adults, forget about it. They're full of contradictions, and their absolutism is ridiculous. So that really helped me develop an anti-authoritarian view of the adult world. So all those things combined, and those early experiences of connectivity and joy between people were so transformative that both my older sister and I became left activists. In fact, I became a feminist in 1968 because my older sister, I lived in New Haven, she lived in Manhattan then, sent me notes from the first year, which was the first feminist publication put out in 1968. And I thought to myself, well, we've got to do that here. I was already active in the anti-war movement, but, we'll do it here. And the American Independent Movement, which was anti-war, said we could use their office. And so we started a women's liberation movement there. And we started borrowing their office. We had about 5 people at first, me and the 5 other women that I got to go. And by 2 months, we had 100 women in there. And that was very exciting. We also felt at that time that because we were the bottom of the economic ladder as women of color being the super bottom, but that if we all stood up together, America would change, capitalism would end, sharing on every level would prevail. And we were very naive, Gloria Steinem joined and brought us Ms. Magazine, and we didn't think, whoa, Ms. Magazine, so slick and no ads. Where did she get the money? It's only later that we found out she was financed by the CIA to make our movement a gender-only movement and excise class, which had been a very important part of the original women's movement. But I've been an activist all my life, you know.
And I just want to say, first of all, thank you for that story and for the courage to talk about some of the personal experiences. I'm not going to call it trauma unless you want to call it trauma, but the personal pain and challenges. And I love how you're able to normalize that, because I'll tell you this, I don't reckon any of us get through this society without some level of trauma and damage, right? Like, we live in a system that is fundamentally based on oppression, exploitation, power over, and domination. None of us are actually living the lives that the goddess expected of us or what we deserve. So I just wanted to say thank you for naming it and not making it maudlin, but also acknowledging that that was part of your upbringing.
Yeah, I want to say that upbringing helped me understand the dictatorship of childhood, where these omnipotent others who knew nothing to be, they just conceived, made me understand the ridiculousness of assumptions. Just because you get pregnant doesn't mean you can take care of anybody, no less a helpless infant for 24 hours a day. So the whole premise is skewed. And that really helped me realize that.
And you know, Harriet, so many times in our conversations, whether it's the privilege that I've had to be just one-on-one with you, or on the David Feldman show, or, you know, we've been together guests. I think Alan Schulman put something together where we were able to talk about the Barbie movie. But you have constantly talked about how the superstructure or the system of capitalism is provoking, engendering, causing mental health challenges, and sometimes literally incentivizing a kind of sociopathic mental illness. So I want to just open that up broadly. As a mental health professional, help our viewers, listeners here on Redneck Gone Green understand how the economic system is causing and creating so many of these mental health challenges.
Well, that's a great question, because really capitalism works because you hire people, they earn money for you, and you don't pay them all that they earn. You take it as your profit. You pay yourself back for some of your costs, and you take all the rest as profit for yourself. So you basically cheat them out of what they earned for you. It's the opposite of what civilizes people. In nursery school and kindergarten, you learn you have to share. These are for all of us together. So you don't let one kid hoard the tricycles and charge the other kids their lunches to use one of the tricycles that belong to everybody. No, you're supposed to share, because that's civilized. And the basic system of hiring people because you make a lot more off them than you give them is theft, and it's unfair. Look, 97% of Americans are employees, 3% are employers, and those 3% are treated as if they deserve to be there. Look at Trump. He inherited 214, well, he got as a gift, he inherited more than that. He got as a gift from daddy $214 million just to get himself started, right? Then he seems, by the report of his sister, to have stolen the money of his siblings to get even richer. And he then defrauded people out of their university money by pretending he was going to teach them and not doing it. He's been crooked since the day is long, and yet he brags that he's rich, and he's given a position of honor rather than the position of a thief and a liar. But if you have money, there's a an assumption that you are somebody special rather than you probably stole it.
Well, I'm going to say this, Harriet. From my perspective, there is no such thing as a big old pile of money that is not coated in blood, sweat, and tears. You just cannot amass a huge amount of money in this imperial system. I also want to circle back to your comment about sharing, because one of my earliest memories as a little boy, and I was probably 5 or 6 years old, I remember fussing with my brother Ty and my cousin Joe Michael. In case there was any doubt about my redneck credentials, Shane, like you, I've got cousins with 2 names, right?
Yeah,
and I know you do too. But Joe Michael, Ty, and I, we were fussing and fighting, and again, we were little kids, right? Maybe even 4. But I remember Mama coming into the room, and she didn't yell at us. And in fact, what I remember is she got down on the floor with us, gently put her hands on us, and just, hey, what's going on? She just sort of calmed the situation a little bit first and said, well, what is happening here? What's going on? Oh, I see. Y'all all want to play with this one toy. And I think it was a little Hot Wheels car or something like that, right? And she said, see, the problem is that there are 3 of you and only 1 of these. Let's all count together. And she got us to 1, 2, 3. So 3 of you and only 1 of these. Oh, but look, she said, there's this. And she reached out. There's this. And she just pulled into the circle of us other toys that, because kids always have other stuff. And she said, look, there's all these other things that y'all can play with. Or if you really, really just want to play with this, you're going to have to share and take turns. And Harriet, she said you have to share. And as a 4-year-old little boy, that made sense to me. And as a 62-year-old man now, it still makes sense to me. All we have to do is share. If we would just share, there is plenty to go around. And with the level of wealth and technology that exists today, we could and should be living in paradise. And that's why I am so angry right now, is because this predatory class are stealing from us. They are stealing our present and they are stealing our future.
One of the reasons they're getting away with it, though, is that we have a pay-to-play democracy. So we get the best democracy money can buy. Because if you are looking at France or the Nordic countries, or even Germany, they don't allow private money in elections. And so you don't, the last election, as I recall, cost $15.5 billion, right? Well, if people give you money, they expect something in return. So we don't tax the rich. So, the poor are taxed and America borrows rather than worry about politicians losing contributions. And we are the biggest debtor nation in the whole world. It's one of the reasons that America no longer has the highest credit rating, because we're not willing to tax the rich, and it's so perverting.
So, Harriet, I got to say, a longtime viewer, listener, Michael Nugent, has dropped into the chat. When I came into the movement, I had a history of psychotic breaks. Comrade shared a chapter on mental health in China during the Cultural Revolution by Ruth Seidel. Not perfect, but since then, I've thought about liberatory mental health under socialism. That seems like a comment that's just begging for your response.
Yes, well, I think what mental health is basically, if you look at a table, a solid table of mental health, one leg is close, very personal relationships. It could be with a sex partner. It could be with a very best friend. It could be with a relative who always wants to hear from you and with whom you are in regular contact. A second leg is other people with whom you have a strong rapport. A third is participation in a group with which you share something. And part of what's happened in America is there are fewer people in any organization of any kind than were in bowling leagues alone in 1970. And that lack of connection and the loneliness is terrible for your mental health. You have to remember that the worst punishment in prison is solitary confinement. A fourth leg is connection to your wider political world. the political world of your nation and other nations combined. The connection is the basis of mental health. And one of the things that helps people become mentally healthy is to participate with other people in groups. And so joining a movement doesn't have to be a political movement, but that is a very strong connection, gives you a sense of being part of the world and part of your country and part of other people. Because 1 in 3 Americans, according to the American Psychiatric Association study, is terribly lonely. And being lonely on the body is equivalent to smoking most of a pack of cigarettes every day. It's terrible for you. We're tribal animals. We never would have survived if we were all alone. Because, humans aren't the fastest. We're not the strongest animals. We don't have the best sense of hearing. We don't have the best sense of smell. We don't have to have the best sense of vision, but we can cooperate. So a lot of tribes people could get together, make noise, drive the big beast into a into a great big pit they collectively dug, and then carve it up and share it.
I'm so glad that you're bringing this up, Harriet, because in economics, and by the way, Mr. Day in the Park, I just got to lift this up. Harriet is so smart. So you're getting a lot of love in the comment section, Harriet. But in economics, I still remember in the introduction to macroeconomics, there's something that they call Homo economicus. And it's this idea of the rugged individual, the rational thinker, doing nothing but trying to figure out how to make a decision that will benefit you. It's very solitary. It's very individualistic. And it's also, frankly, not accurate about human beings. I mean, I'm not saying that we're angelic, but there's also Homo solidaricus. The reality is, as you say, we would not have survived as a species if we had not cooperated and collaborated. And I want to say this, Harriet, I don't for a minute think that human beings are either fundamentally angelic or demonic. I think 99% of us do what our society and our culture incentivizes. I had the great privilege, even though I was born into poverty, my mama and my papa loved on me as a little baby. My earliest memories are safety, security, knowledge. And because I was born, Shane, you and I have talked about this, out of wedlock, as they say, I reckon that my mama and papa knew that there were certain people in that small town that were going to try to make me feel a certain kind of way. And they were committed to ensuring that I knew that I was wanted, that I was loved, that I had gifts, that I should offer my gifts. And they taught me that other people had gifts. And I had the great privilege of loving, discipline, and nurturing to help guide me along the way. So all I'm saying is, I reckon that if everybody got that taste in their infancy, or if we had a superstructure, an economic system that was incentivizing the natural tendency to cooperate and collaborate, we would have a completely different world.
We sure would.
Instead, we got a fat narcissist in the fucking White House.
Yes, and we have lots of crime and lots of stealing and people going mad and knifing each other and hitting each other with large blocks of concrete and so on. You can't go 5 blocks in New York City without seeing some man, it's always or almost always men, raving to himself. And because he's gone crazy. I
want to get to that personally, but before we do, you made a reference to bowling leagues, and it makes me, I reckon you did it on purpose for Dr. Robert Putnam's excellent book called Bowling Alone, which examines the decline of social capital and civic engagement in the United States. So I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that metaphor of increasing in participation in collective activities and what effect that has on our mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being.
Can I ask a question too? While you're doing that, because it keeps coming to my head, a lot of young kids, they think that their interaction on social media is a substitute for direct face-to-face, one-on-one engagement as human beings. And I want, if you can, just weave in what your thoughts are in response to that, as well as answering David's question. That'd be helpful.
Yes. Well, one of the things that is important to know is that study of Robert Putnam's, which is so important, was done in 2009, and it's been repeated over and over again with the same results, so that it's not a dated study. And what you get from dealing with a human being is all the signs if they're telling you the truth. The internet is full of lies. One of the rituals of people who do dating on the internet is after they get to know each other a little, they say, "What did you lie about?" Well, what did you lie about? You know, that all the little signals that we give through our personhood are missed if you're on the internet. And people posture because it's a stage. It's not another human being who you can count on and who you see and who sees where you live after a while and knows where you're coming from. It's a disembodied voice. It's a picture. It's a movie. It's not true. And that's why there's enormous loneliness of children who are glued to their cell phones, or people on dates who are each on a cell phone and not looking at one another and talking to one another. We need each other. Human beings are pack animals. They don't find one set of bones in any cave because people couldn't survive. And we psychologically can't survive without each other. You know, Shane, who's on this show, recommended a wonderful book to me called Tribes, about why so many veterans come back home and go mad. And it describes the closeness one has in the military, where you're doing terrible things, but you're also in danger, and your buddies cry, and you cry on their bodies, and you hold each other, and you're a unit, and you come back into our atomized society, and you can't bear the memories anymore, and you can't bear the pain of what you've gone through. We need each other. And on that score, Gloria Steinem's intervention in the women's movement to make it a gender-only movement was terribly destructive, because if we're going to win justice, we'll win it together. Men, women, all colors, all sexualities, together. Because what we are is the majority of the people who do everything. They have the money, but they need us. We don't need them.
You know, I'm so glad you actually brought that up, because I'm reminded of the Combahee River Collective, the Black feminist lesbian socialist organization in Boston in the late 70s, formed to address the specific oppressions faced by Black women, but it was in the context of socialism and understanding the intersectionality of feminism to gender, sexuality, and class. And I'm glad that you had the courage to point out that Gloria Steinem this is objectively true, y'all. Look it up. Gloria Steinem was funded by the CIA in order to drive a wedge between the socialism that was bubbling in the feminist movement and to ensure that it became an identitarian movement of just gender. And if we were able in that time to bring together an understanding of the true intersectionality between white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, settler colonialism, and capitalism, we would be in a different place now. And I will assert, Harriet, that what this movement needs now is an understanding that we have to unite together against any exploitation, against any oppression, against any division, and recognize, like the way I talk about it, no war but class war.
Yeah, that's a very important point, because they did the same thing for the Black movement. There's a book called The Great Wurlitzer about that operation of the FBI and the CIA, because they wanted to make it Black power rather than civil rights for everyone and throw the whites out of the group. And so that, and they succeeded. And identity politics, it's important for people to understand where they come from, but it's also more important right now to understand that we need each other because we're in dangerous times.
Well, we really are in dangerous times. And that actually brings me to the next conversation that I wanted to have. And it really is about Donald Trump, because I continue to be flabbergasted, Harriet, like with the lies. And by the way, Starchild writes in to say, Dr. Fraad is the exact opposite of Trump. So, as I say, you're getting a lot of love in our comments section. But I do want to better understand that even with all the lies, even with all of the promises that are being broken consistently, why do so many Americans still support Donald Trump?
Well, I think one reason is that the American dream, you work hard, you'll get reward, that's over. Okay? If you're not born with the silver spoon in your mouth, you'll be chewing on tin for the rest of your life. Okay? And hard work isn't necessarily the way at all. And they've been lied to. And they kind of admire the liar and the cheat who didn't obey the rules and who just did for himself. And I think that that's part of it. And part of it is that they need change. And he was the only person who said, I'm going to make things change. Of course, they're getting fascistic change, which is terrible and frightening and making everything worse. But I think they admired somebody who wasn't a sucker like them, obeying the rules and getting cheated. And so they enjoy his lies and manipulations and cheating and bankruptcies and using the system to get himself ahead at everyone else's expense. Because they're raged.
That's a profound observation, Harriet, because one of the things that, like, we know, first of all, that Donald Trump has the lowest approval ratings of any president at this point in the history of the United States. Having said that, he still has a base that is on fire. And let's be clear, he is engendering brown shirts. And for folks who don't know that term,
called ICE. Yeah.
In a fascist country, there is official state repression, the police, the military, and so forth. And brown shirts are the paramilitary. These are the Proud Boys, the Bugaloos. These are the political assassination in Minnesota, where I will stipulate was carried out by a, quote, brown shirt, because this is not actually formally part of the government at all, but the rhetoric that Donald Trump uses, the nudge and the wink that he engages in, is literally encouraging and giving license to something that we haven't seen in this country, not even in the height of the anti-communism of the 1950s. This is back to the Bund of the 1930s. Like, this is dangerous.
It is dangerous, but he offered change. He offered a dream which is totally unachievable, and that is dawning on people. Make America great again, like go back to those good old Jim Crow days, where in 1950, when America's dollar was golden and we ruled the world because all other advanced economies were destroyed. So those aren't the conditions of our existence anymore. Our manufacturing base was outsourced by greedy capitalists who wanted people to work with lower wages, no ecological restrictions, and very few or no benefits. And they're not going to pay the billions to come back and pay higher wages here.
And it's worth pointing out, Dr. Fraad, that like for all the hard, by the way, You Don't Like My Music writes in with the sunk cost fallacy, that Trump supporters have invested so much in him, including their own identities, that they can't abandon Trump because it would be abandoning themselves. What do you think about that observation?
I don't think it's true, because I think they're starting to abandon him. Look at the lack of people at that at his military march happy birthday self. I don't think so. I think that if they start getting personally hurt with the inflation,
which they will,
it's inevitable. It was undocumented workers that picked the produce, and already a lot of it is rotting because they're afraid to show up for work. And they will have higher prices. There are fewer opportunities. Their unions will be struggling because he's anti-union, and they'll feel betrayed and angry. But right now they want to believe in something. The left didn't give them that. They didn't give them a life with a purpose.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because you're the one who 2 or 3 years ago taught me, because, hey, I don't know what I don't know even right now, and neither do you, the viewer, listener. Nobody knows what they don't know. Harriet shared this with me several years ago on David Feldman's show. The old slogan for the Communist Party in the 1930s was, join the Communist Party for a life with a purpose. And that's stuck with me ever since you told me that, Harriet, because I do think that the idea of working together to make the world a better place, to share with each other, to dance together, to sing together, as you talked about the hootenannies, that's a life worth living. And capitalism will not give us that. No. At best, all it can give us, at best, is stuff. And now it can't even do that.
No, now it can't. But people needed a hope. The left was decimated after the anti-communist movement of Joseph McCarthy, which cast the whole left as traitorous fellow travelers and expunged them from the unions. And Philip Murray, the head of the AFL-CIO, cooperated and kicked out the whole left from his union. So they went from 35% to what they are now, 11%. Okay. You need unity, you need belief, and you need to say, my life is important. And capitalism tells you you're nothing.
What really gets me, Harriet, is that properly understood, the individual is able to fully express themselves through the collective process. It's not an either or. And what I really appreciate talking to you and listening to you is the recognition that our own individual mental health, our spiritual development is really going to be better served together. And I just want to name it. I think it's really challenging is not even covering it. But the reality is, even though it was lies, Donald Trump as a candidate used better populist rhetoric than the Democratic Party did. We have to name that. The Democratic Party thoroughly abandoned the working class in favor of the corporations and the big moneyed interests. You couple that with their support of the genocide in Palestine. We know why Donald Trump won this election. And what's galling to me is the Democratic Party leadership are doubling and tripling down on the approach that they're taking. They are going to continue to lose elections unless and until they understand that they are in a fight, and they are bringing spreadsheets and billionaire talking points to a gunfight.
That's right. And people are understanding that. In New York City, the leading candidate now is Zohran Mamdani, who is not taking corporate money and who wants to tax the rich, freeze the rents, do something for the homeless people. Because in New York, 1 out of 8 public school kids is homeless. It's a huge problem. Over 120,000 families. And that's his program. And the others have denounced him, particularly Cuomo has denounced him, not Landers, but Cuomo. And yet he has the popular imagination. I don't know if he'll win tomorrow, but he is the most The polls say he's the most popular candidate. And AOC went against the Democratic establishment, and she's enormously popular. And Bernie Sanders says he's a socialist, and he's enormously popular. But what we have to do is build grassroots socialist movements that nurture people and listen to people and empower people together, because we're a very lonely group. And the anti-communist purges followed real fear on the part of the richest people, because FDR threatened them with takeovers because there were so many socialists, communists, unionists who were organized. He said, you better let me tax you at 96.8%, or you won't have a wealth. They'll take it.
I mean, FDR, I think it's really funny to me that the right excoriates FDR, but Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and I would say properly, said, I don't know why y'all hate me so much. I saved capitalism. And I think it's true, which leads me, and Michael Nugent, by the way, drops into the chat. The left in many ways has turned on itself through identity politics and cancel culture policing itself and giving up on building a liberatory society. Thank you for that, Michael. And that brings me to the next question I want to pose to you, Dr. Harriet Fraad, as a mental health professional and an unapologetic leftist. What do you think the left needs to do to win the working class?
Well, the first thing I think we need to do is talk about how people are cheated, capture their anger. Trump is always acting cheated and mistreated. Not Kamala. You know, we have to say you've been cheated and mistreated, and everybody, we don't have to be. The wealth is there. We have to take it. You know, there's a saying of Lou Andrea Salome, one of the leading students of Freud, and she said, life will give you problems, don't mistake it. But if you want a life, you take it. Give people a chance to take it together and say, you know, we've been cheated. This is how the cheating works. This is how capitalism works. They took your job so they could make even more money. Then they bought it back and bought your politicians. And you felt helpless. Well, you're not. You know, we have to address it. And we have to have a unified movement. And there are people that will do that. Bernie Sanders would have won if the Democrats hadn't stabbed him in the back. David Hogg, who had organized the Parkland protests against mass shootings, they want to kick him out of the Democratic Party because he's too progressive. All sorts
They kicked him off the Democratic National Committee, by the way.
Yes, they did. He's not what they want, but he's what we need. And I think we really need that kind of unity. We need a working class program that's unapologetically working class, protecting our jobs from outsourcing, from profiteering, and empowering us to take our country back.
So, you know, thank you for that, Dr. Fraad. Again, I knew that you would answer that question directly and fearlessly. I do want to say that You Don't Like My Music, the name, wrote in with, if Soren wins, they will try to stop ranked choice voting everywhere. I do want to take this moment to help people understand that New York City has ranked choice voting, which means as a voter, if you're in New York City, you can rank order your preferences. My first choice is, my second choice is, my third choice, up to 5 choices. And if nobody gets an absolute majority of first choices, then they go into what's known as an instant runoff. So you eliminate the lowest vote getter, and the people who voted for that eliminated candidate didn't waste their votes because they've already indicated who their second choice would be in a runoff, right? So it's a very democratic system. It guarantees a majority ruler. And I agree with You Don't Like My Music's comment. I'm really worried that Cuomo, who, if he loses this election, instead of acknowledging that his allegations of sexually harassing not 1, not 2, not 3, but 13 women while he was in office, instead of acknowledging that his corporatist imperialist policies are not majoritarian policies for New Yorkers, they're going to try to blame a democratic reform. And I think that we on the left have to be clear that we think ranked choice voting is an improvement. Proportional representation is even better. And at the end of the day, we are not going to give our votes ever again to a corporatist, militarist, imperialist. Ya basta. Enough already. I will tell you this, Harriet. I am not voting for imperialist, genocidal maniacs anymore. Period. Full stop. I just won't vote if that's the only choice I have.
Well, that makes sense. It really does make sense, because we do have to give our country an alternative. One of the reasons they voted for Trump is he was different. He was an alternative. He did say he wanted change. The change he wants is terrible. He will further disenfranchise and impoverish most Americans. But people were attracted to change because they need it badly. The American working class has been really, really immiserated. And white men have often blamed women or black people because the feminist movement and the civil rights movement got strong at about the same time as jobs were being outsourced, or a little later. So they, and that's the right wing pointing to the other groups with whom you need to unite as if they're your enemy.
I thank you so much, Dr. Fraad. Listen, we're running out of time, so I do want to ask you again, as somebody who comes deeply from both movements as well as a conviction around ideology as a leftist, how close do you think we are to fascism in this country?
It's hard to know, because in order to have fascism, you need to have the military. And in the United States, there are 1.3 million active duty service people. But they're actually 31% are minority, and almost 18% are female. Sometimes they're female minority. But the willingness of Black people and other people of color, they're mainly Blacks and Hispanics that make up so much of the armed forces, because basically it's an economic draft, and they're the poorer people economically. But whether they would turn on their own people, I am not sure. But if he doesn't have the army, he can't pull it off. I think he's trying to engineer something so that he can take over and call in the military.
Yeah, that's what I worry the most about.
But I don't know if they'll go. What do you think? Shane,
I worry about a domestic faux terrorism event happening soon that will be blamed on some other faction group, similar to the 9/11 event, and people will be all up in arms, and it'll be a fake thing to try to gather support. And even if they're not, I feel like they want to use that event that they will create themselves as a jumping off point for declaring martial law, because that's what he's after. He's after martial law hardcore. He wants to put himself on a throne, and he sees that as a pathway of doing it. And like you said, he can't have the fascist takeover without the military, and that's one way to do it. And I'm afraid a lot of people are going to get really hurt, killed, and have their lives upended because this fucking maniac is running loose like a crazy.
No, I mean, look, I think that you're both making a very powerful point. And one thing that I want to point out, that genuine fascism does require a popular movement behind it. And this is why it's so important, even if you don't agree with the exact talking points of 5051 or Indivisible or the No More Kings rally, we got to be out in the streets to show that there is not a mass movement supporting Donald Trump. Because You know, you can have authoritarianism, you can have a dictator, but you can't have actual fascism unless there is a broad mass support for it. And that's why it's so important for me that we continue to resist and demonstrate that. Harriet, this time has just flown by, but I do want to give you any opportunities for any final thoughts, including I'm going to invite you to let folks know about Capitalism Hits Home.
Okay, well, Capitalism Hits Home is in a book called Class Struggle on the Home Front. And the central essay is an essay about the revolution in the household. Because one of the things that happened when the capitalists deserted and outsourced the better paid white male jobs is that women were forced into the labor force and didn't want to come back for a second job and do all the cooking, cleaning, sex work, social work, connecting their husbands and children to everybody, managing their kids' lives. It was too much. And so they opted out. 70% of divorces are now initiated by women. And for the first time in American history, the majority of American women are single and by choice. So that there's been a revolution in the family. The family has been the social safety net for people. And it's now torn because women can't do both jobs. And because men can no longer support, white men only could do this, dependent women at home and dependent children at home. And so that the family is really bursting apart. And that was the social safety net of America. And this revolution that has happened, which was initiated by capitalists deserting for more money, but is now a huge phenomenon that we have to pay attention to. The central essay, which I thought of the title for, was "For every knight in shining armor, there's a castle waiting to be cleaned." Because it talks about the difference between the romantic dream and all of the, songs. We're going to go to chapel and get married and we'll never be lonely anymore. That it isn't true, and people don't even believe it anymore. Now only 61% of single men are looking for a partner. Less than 40% of women are. 36. Because that social network of a hetero couple with children is breaking down. Americans aren't having children anymore either. Almost half of American women say they're not having kids, women with childbearing age. The whole thing that too is gone. And that's one of the reasons that so many white men supported Donald Trump, who promises to bring sexism back along with racism. Of course, he and his wealthy friends took away the economic conditions of the family that we used to have. And so it doesn't work. And it doesn't work anywhere in the world except sub-Saharan Africa. But
so, Harriet, again, we have to close out because we are literally at the end of time. I just want to give you a personal thank you for coming on to this program. I really appreciate you. Shane, I want to remind our listeners and viewers, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. The Redneck Gone Green community is growing, getting larger, stronger, and better organized. And I'm very excited, Shane. Can we confirm that tomorrow, Tuesday, June 24, we're going to have a special episode of Redneck Gone Green? Dr. Rick Wolf is going to join us, and we're going to talk about the war in Iran and put it into some very specific socio-political, economic context so we can make sense of it best we can. And with that, Shane, I got to say, as always, brother, thanks for what you do. We'll see you tomorrow.
That's right. Thank
Bye-bye.
you again, Dr. Fraad. Bye-bye.
Thank you.